may want to formally adopt a chairperson for this committee. Emily, you may have done some of the niceties at one meeting, at the last committee meeting. I believe Michelle, you took over. So you either have a preference for this committee, the three of you can determine how to best proceed with that.
I thought we actually did, we did hold a vote, and Emily was kind enough to take the chair position for this committee.
Okay, so I just wanted to, I was not quite sure because I know you chaired the last one.
I did, I pinch hitted for her.
Okay, okay, that's what the confusing part. So Emily, are you okay with that?
I am, yes, I'm sorry.
Okay.
I just, completely forgot that I was the chair, even though it's right there on the agenda, so my apologies.
Okay, just wanted to be sure.
Call us to order then. Okay, great. I'm going to call this virtual meeting of the contract committee to order. And I guess, gosh, I need to just run down the chair. I don't have any comments, except I guess I need to get my act together. And then we have a few items for action in the agenda item summaries. So I think if it's okay, we'll just move right into that first contract, unless somebody wants to give me some other direction.
Actually, Emily, real quick, you've got to call roll.
Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you. It looks like AJ was
That's okay. No problem.
I don't know why you guys put me in charge. This is okay. So roll call. Emily Secor, chair. I'm here. Michelle.
Here.
Vice chair. Thank you. And Stephen. Ooh, I caught him off guard. Stephen, will you just jump in when you get a chance and let us know that you're here? Thanks. All right. What's next?
Now you can go ahead and call the first agenda item.
Okay, perfect. Sounds good. So we're going to look at the first contract 2021-25 for DPS Consulting, and Christina looks like she's going to present some follow-up on that.
Good afternoon. Actually, I'm going to provide some of the follow-up on that particular contract. I think as we reviewed the questions from the board meeting, what I assessed is that a lot of your questions were around the procurement method, how we actually arrived at this particular vendor. And so what I thought I would do this afternoon is kind of go over what that process is in general, and then kind of narrow it down to specifically this contract. So just to bring to remembrance of the contract committee, in 2019, we did a amendment to our procurement policy that allowed for personal services. And specifically, we designated what type of services we would be able to procure under personal services, and that is a special procurement type, so that as we had some experience, there was some issue in terms of using the competitive bidding process in order to get certain of our professional services. So up until that point in 2019, we had put out bids for landscaping services. We had put out bids for janitorial services. We had put out bids for auditing services and also for grant management services, in which the result was not sole source, but a single bidder. Just to kind of go back through that, there is a process in our procurement policies and procedure, as well as in FTA's 4221F, that's third-party contracting guidelines, and in the Oregon Revised Statute for how you handle a competitive process when you receive a single bidder. And you do what's called a single bid analysis. And a part of that is going back, you take a look at your scope of work to ensure that you've not included anything in the scope of work that would be exclusive or that would exclude any particular vendor. You contact any vendors that had any activity on your particular solicitation. So with LTD, we use the e-procurement system. Previously, it was eBid. Currently, it's called ProcureWare. And that particular system allows us to see who has accessed our documents, downloaded our documents, submitted questions. And so we utilize that list along with the list of people who would have attended our pre-proposal meetings or pre-bid meetings to contact them to find out, hey, it looked like you were interested in our particular scope of work. can you explain to us why you decided not to bid? And through that process, if you find that, and a lot of times it's we were busy or we forgot the deadline or anything like that, if you find that you didn't, as an organization, we didn't do anything that limited competition, then you move on to the next stage. And the next stage is where you do a price and or cost analysis. And what determines price and cost analysis is, if it's a long-time service, you might do some life cycle cost. If it's just price, it's just sort of like what you do when you go to the supermarket. You're going to compare one versus the other and see what shakes out. And we typically will do that comparison with our independent cost estimate. As a part of our overall procurement policies and procedures, we require for any major services, particularly over $100,000, that our departments submit an independent cost estimate. An independent cost estimate can be based off of past experience, meaning if we've used a vendor of this type or this type of service, we can use the rates that we have. We can also contact other organizations to see what they have paid for that, and you can do just a general internet search to find that out. And what you want to do is just determine, is that cost fair and reasonable? For the Federal Transit Administration, ultimately, we have to be able to make the statement to our auditors that the cost that we're paying for that particular service is fair and reasonable. So once we've done the cost analysis or the price analysis and we're satisfied, then we just move forward as usual. There are some times where you find a vendor might say, hey, we needed a little more time. And if you're talking amongst yourself internally, you might decide that we're going to extend the time for a bid or whatever. But in this particular case with Gloria Gallardo, we did not find that. So we did we did not find that there were any barriers to competition. The initial solicitation that went out in 2016, we had 3 vendors that participated. One was called Victorious Gold Partners. There was Ms. Gallardo and DBS Consulting, and then LCOG. And we solicited LCOG because LCOG often provides for us a lot of the personal services that we require, especially particular to transit and transportation related. When we check back with both organization, Victorious Gold Partners said they could not provide someone from their firm within the time frame that we specified, meaning as quickly, nor could they provide someone for as long as we had specified, because at that point it was unknown. We didn't have a particular time frame. LCOG stated that they didn't respond due to their inability to meet all of the requirements of the scope of work. And again, we went forward with our single source analysis, and then we awarded the initial bid to Ms. Gallardo. As we're coming around on this term, the reason why we have termed this a sole source is that throughout the entire time, at various times, Christina has engaged her staff. So she made the effort to do professional development, and that professional development was unsuccessful for a variety of reasons. One is we had several of the people that she started out training in this profession, they found other opportunities outside of LTD. And then so she was left to start over. We have at different times also sought other professional services. I will say just as a kind of every time, because each year with the contract, we require that the project managers, or in this case, the contract manager, they submit to us a contractor performance evaluation that we include in our files. So typically when that time comes around, we do a general search. For this particular one, we've searched the GSA multiple award schedule. And the reason why it's the multiple award schedule is because grant management is not one of those services that's singled out. It's kind of lumped into a group of a bunch of things like IT, HR, financial services. So we go out and we check to see that. And what we have found overwhelmingly each time is that the rate that we're currently paying for Ms. Gallardo is still fair and reasonable. Additionally, she has had excellent contractor performance. And we have that information provided on page 2 of the AIS. that we've inserted into the board packet. So I think I just kind of wanted to give a general overview of what our process is internally, the varying checks and balances, and also to assure the committee that we have annual audits. With each annual audit, we have to provide to our auditors all of the micro purchases that we've made, all of the sole source contracts that we've awarded, what their original value was, what any contract changes or amendments that are there, and then the auditor, and then provide those actual contracts and any supporting documentation to the auditors. So in particular regarding sole source procurements or contracts rather, those contracts are regularly audited by our regular auditor. Then we have our triennial or our comprehensive review that's performed by FTA, in which we provide that same information. It's just over a 3-year period and we're currently in the midst of one now, in which those auditors do a really deep dive. But also, if you'll recall that in 2016, we underwent our second procurement system review, and sole source procurements was not a deficiency. It was not called out as a deficiency for us, nor have we been called out for any deficiencies or findings in sole source procurements in our annual audits. It is, I think sometimes when people are thinking about a sole source contract, there's some fear, around that, but it's really not. A sole source or single bid or competitions or solicitations that result in a sole bidder are not precluded. In all actuality, Federal Transit Administration, as well as Oregon Revised Statute and the Oregon Administrative Rules, have really clear guidelines around how that happens, because it happens often enough in order to have policies and procedures created around that. I think the concern is whether there would be any abuse of those particular methods of procurement. And again, as I've stated, we've not had any evidence of that, either from our federal oversight or our state oversight.
Thank you so much for that, Kalina. I think it's, for the contract committee, at least, I don't know about everybody else. I think it's just, we also want to stay really competitive. I don't know that we're as concerned about the audit process or any misgivings about what we've been awarding, just making sure that we're staying competitive and using every dollar as wisely as we possibly can. So I did want to mention Stephen is here. I think his mute button just didn't work when we were doing the roll call. So he is here and listening. Stephen, I don't know if you want to jump in and say hello or ask any questions.
I'm here. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I was here earlier.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Michelle, did you have any comments or anything that you'd like to follow up on from Kalina's presentation?
No, I appreciate the very thorough explanation of that process. I think it kind of adds just a level of understanding that makes us all probably more comfortable with, big dollar decisions like that. So thank you very much.
Perfect. And Stephen, I'm sorry, did you want to add anything, or did you have any questions, comments, concerns from Kalina's comments?
I appreciate Kalina's time and explanation on that.
All right, perfect. Well, then I think what we need to do from here is, it looks like we need to decide if we're going to be moving this forward back to the board for approval, or is that incorrect? Anybody?
Do we have any outstanding questions related to the contract itself, as far as the timeframes? Or I know we had some questions surrounding whether or not we wanted to extend it for the length of time that's been identified. I'm personally fine with that, but I just want to make sure that we take the opportunity to cover that here if we need to.
I think the last time this was before the contract committee, it was determined that we actually have the option to cancel the contract at any point. So my preference would be to go ahead and extend for the longest period of time available, since we do have that flexibility. But I agree with you, Michelle. If there's anything else, I think we should definitely discuss it before we make a motion.
Stephen, do you have any concerns, or are you ready to move this one forward?
I think your point, or I think Emily's point about the term of this contract, base term of 2 years, and then it options of one to three. I would opt for year-over-year renewals, but I don't think we have to die on that hill.
I do agree that with the opportunity to back out of a contract at any time, I think we have, we have that built in. So I have comfort with what I see here.
I think I'll just say again, my concern is just continues to be not that this is a sole source, but that we didn't have any additional bids. So just trying to make sure things stay competitive and fair is my biggest sort of, I guess, hill that I want to stand on. But otherwise, I'm really comfortable with this as far as the terms. Since they're already competitive, I don't have an issue with them. So I guess I will entertain a motion.
I move to forward contract number 2021-25 to the Board of Directors with a recommendation for approval.
Is there a second? I'll second it. Okay, and then any discussion? Seeing none, I guess we'll move to a roll call vote. Michelle?
Yes.
Stephen?
Yes.
Emily? Yes. And the motion passes anonymous. And I always say that. Unanimously. I always want to say anonymously, but obviously it's not anonymous. Okay, perfect. I think that's all good to go. And we'll move on to the next agenda item, 2021-05 for mobility management strategy. Looks like Andrew presented this. I'm not sure if he's going to be, yep, there he is. Take it away, Andrew.
Hi, thank you. Really appreciate the opportunity to come talk to you today about this, because it's something I've been excited about for a while. So this is a contract this contract would enter us into, I guess, agreement with Tool Design Group to develop a mobility management strategy. So I'm sure you've heard me talk about this before. If you've seen me around meetings for a while. So mobility management is a customer-centric approach to delivering service to our customers, basically providing them with more options and then matching them to the best choice for their trip. And it's something I think that a lot of trans agencies are talking about these days because it really is kind of a new approach to our industry. So kind of at the same time that transit agencies are talking about this, we're also seeing a lot of new technology and new partnerships kind of opening up opportunities for transit agencies to provide services that weren't previously possible. And given that context, I don't think the question is whether LTD should find ways to use these new tools, but what role we should play and how we can be successful in delivering mobility to our community with them. So we've proposed to develop a strategy that will kind of build on the really highly successful services and pilots that we already have. And the heart of that will be a framework that really helps us to evaluate how we can be successful, like I mentioned, with different types of partnerships and different modes of service. We'll explore what role LTD should play in providing mobility in the region. And at the end, we'll have kind of a list of things that we could do in the short run. But rather than focusing on only what's available today, the mobility management strategy is really going to be designed to allow us to continue to engage with new modes as they're developed and implemented in the community and new partners become available for us to work with. So staff, we selected Tool Design Group after a competitive RFP process. We had put out a request for proposals and received bids, normal, I think, 30-day period. We received 3 bids and we selected Tool Design Group based on really a strong and creative approach to the project, including their public involvement that they proposed, their focus on equity in the proposal, and the way that they suggested that we develop this assessment framework. The total value of the contract is up to $220,000, and the funding comes from the statewide Transportation Improvement Fund. So as part of the STIF process, we applied for money in the biennium that's ending July 1st, and we didn't spend that obviously because we're here today talking about a contract. So we applied for those funds in the fiscal year 22 and 23 biennium for our STIP funding. and I believe that has gone through by this point. It was recommended by LTD's board through that whole process. And so with that, based on that rationale, the board is being advised to authorize the general manager to enter into a contract with Tool Design Group for the purposes of purchasing consulting services to develop a mobility management strategy. And the kind of alternatives on this, I suppose you could not forward this to the board for approval, but that would mean we either need to engage in another RFP process or potentially not engage in the project, which would mean potentially, you know, those STIF funds would be unspent in this biennium and would go back into the STIF funding pot. So with that, I'm happy to talk more about the proposal and the project. And if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Great, thank you, Andrew. Stephen, Michelle, do either of you have questions? Otherwise, I'm going to jump in. Okay, Stephen, go ahead.
You jump in first and I'll follow you. How's that?
Perfect. Andrew, can you tell us what you hope to get out of this project? Like, is there an ideal outcome as far as what you're hoping that the design group will present after their consulting services are completed?
Yeah, so we kind of said the way we did the RFP actually was pretty interesting because we didn't tell them exactly how we wanted them to do things, but we said the outcomes from this, these are kind of the minimum required outcomes. Tell us how you'd answer it, because we were looking for, I think, creativity in how we were approaching the project. The outcome of this is a number of things. So as I mentioned, I think partnerships are becoming more important for LTD. We're finding ourselves more and more engaged in that, particularly as we talk about doing things that provide mobility to the community and align with our values, but are not necessarily the traditional model of transit. And a great example of this is the bike share system in Eugene. We've been a founding member of Peace Health Rides. We actually did the feasibility study, and we have a role formally in the partnership as Peace Health Rides. We're not the owner of that system. We don't operate it, but they are really good partners for us. And as these kinds of projects come along, I think we really do need to figure out what our role is. And that starts with understanding all the different roles we could play. So we're going to be doing case studies and kind of work like that, talking with other agencies and looking at other projects to find out kind of how transit agencies have been successful in different roles and what roles frankly don't work, right? That's a huge thing too. We don't want to find ourselves in that. We're going to work on developing kind of what I'm calling a guide to pilots, because I think we've found ourselves in a situation where we're doing these pilots and we've been really successful, I think, in our pilots. But that's maybe just by accident or because the staff at LTD is really phenomenal. But we want to really make sure that we have the kind of background we need to do pilots successfully, because those will be important as we're testing kind of all these different things we've never had experience with before. Finally, the kind of big result will be, I guess I call it like a mobility assessment framework. I don't have a good catchy name for it yet. We're going to have to work on that as part of the process. But really, we want to go through and really, I think, use this framework to look at these projects. And it's not about, you know, scooters might be here later this spring. And I hear people say, well, what's LTD going to do about scooters? And that's like, I'm hoping to use the framework to answer that question, right? But the broader question is like, what is LTD's role in all of these different things? And in many of them, LTD probably doesn't have a role, right? Like we probably would never be, you know, like buying taxi rides for anyone who wanted them at any time, right? That's probably not something we have a role in. But there are probably a lot of different ways we could participate and provide mobility to the region with a lot of different providers. And this will help us to answer that. It doesn't tell us necessarily what we should do year to year as we're faced with like budget decisions and things like that. But it does tell us, you know, as we're applying for STIF funding, as we have capacity and budget to do other things, we can compare some of these options. You know, should we invest in bike share? Should we invest in scooters? Or should we put that money into more bus service? Should we put that into mobility on demand service? That's really the question we'll be answering.
Thank you, Andrew. Stephen, why don't you go ahead?
Thank you, Emily. Hey, Andrew. A few questions. One, I guess, from a macro question. It would be helpful, and I'll speak for myself, but maybe Michelle and Emily agree, it would be helpful that when we get a recommendation like this, to get a few ideas. You got 3 responses. I sure would like to know ahead of time, how many were you expecting? Were you expecting 2, a dozen? And also who the other folks who responded, and also the criteria, the checklist that you guys use to choose tool. Not saying you made a good choice or a bad choice, but I just would like to have some visibility into what sort of metrics did you and Tom and your team go into the process expecting? Starting off with, for instance, again, how many responses you expected to get. So those are some just some macro questions going forward. Specifically, and this is partly related to now that you've chosen tool, I think it would help the contract board and then the board at large to know a little bit about the organization you chose. How big are they? How many jobs like this have they done? Particularly for tool, I think you made a great call. It's a great success story. Jennifer has rocked it for about 18 years now with her company. And if you look at their history, they walk the talk of diversity and just being a really good company to work for. I had to find that out for myself by doing some web researching and calling a few folks who are in the business. It sure would be nice if in the packet it said we chose tool and here's a little bit about them. And then finally getting to the financial pieces, just how big is a particular company that we're choosing, particularly for something like this, because I want to know, this is a company that has a top line run rate of $500,000. So this contract is going to be huge for them, or is this going to be just one of many contracts? And that helps, I think, the contract board and then the board writ large to understand who LTD is engaging. Thank you.
Certainly, I will do my best to include that in the future. If you'd like, I can address a few of those points, now.
Andrew, I think Kalina could probably do a better job at talking about these things, because I think what Stephen's talking about is not just this one, but overall. And maybe understanding, putting in the criteria in all futures would be good. And so the board has more knowledge about that. But I will say there's elements in the process that even if we put them in, if the board would probably not go back and do all the research themselves, right? Because they can't be the selection board and the awarding board. Even myself, as a general manager, I go through some of the key criteria. And what we wouldn't want to do is have staff doing the same work, I'm doing the same work, the board's doing the same work. Then what I think some of the questions we would have then is who's doing the checks and balances. So maybe Kalina can talk about the big picture, and then we can get, because I think Stephen makes some good points. So we want to make sure we do that with all of the contracts, not just this one.
Absolutely. Thank you, AJ. Wendy and I are chatting now to make sure that we're getting all these things down to ensure that we, in our description for our agenda item summaries moving forward, that we provide a checklist for everybody, but also for us as we review the agenda item summaries for submission to the contract review board, that we're including a little more information that speaks to the questions that you have, Stephen, because I think that they are legitimate. I think this is just learning each board. We put in a lot of information in the beginning, and the board was like, hey, we don't need 15 pages of that. That was with the previous board. And so now what you're saying is, okay, can we get a little more information? And that's fine. I think that we change how we present based on what you want to hear and what you want to see and what you really have time to review. So it's our pleasure to do that. We're noting all of those things and we'll provide those as we move forward. And what I will say is we'd be glad to amend the agenda item summaries that we currently have and provide that information in the board packet, assuming that we can still meet Camille's deadline so that we get the board packet published in enough time. But if we're unable to do that for this particular board meeting, we will definitely pick up and handle that in the June contract committee and June board meetings.
Thank you, Kalina. Stephen, is that sufficient, or did you have anything further that you want to add or clarify?
Thank you, Emily. Thank you, AJ and Kalina, for those comments. I just want to be clear, though. I'm not suggesting that the contract board or the board as a whole is doing the work that Wendy and Kalina and teams are doing very well. I'm just simply saying, and this is my personal bias, I think any contract board or any board, regardless of its composition, should be given basically a little cheat sheet of started off with at the very beginning before the process even starts. Hey, we're going to be sending this contract out for bid. We're putting an RFP out and we expect to get, I'll pick a number, 6 responses. If we get 2 and we see that as a pattern, in my world, that's telling me something about my expectations need to be adjusted, or if we're getting a dozen and that is burying you guys with too many responses, then that is also going to be telling us something. And then just regarding the information, again, I have no interest in reading 15 pages, but I would like just a recap of these were the criteria that the board used, the contract board, you guys used to vet these, in this case, these 3 responses. And this is why we chose Tool Group over the others. To me, that's maybe at most a 1-page recap. And then it's just simply a little information about the winning company of, again, this contract is worth $250,000, making up numbers here, and their typical run rate is 100 million, or it's 750,000. And if it's the latter, I think, I'll speak for myself, but I imagine Emily and Michelle would go, well, gee, this is a huge contract for them. Have you guys, and you probably would have, but that would beg the question, is this too big of a contract for them? Are we engaging the right folks? It's just that sort of stuff, just so we have some visibility, because from time to time, I do get questions as a board member, how come so-and-so has this contract? And just being able to know these basic points about the process, I think would be helpful for me, and I believe the board writ large.
Thank you, Stephen, for those comments. I appreciate it. And I think Andrew's presentation touched on some of that, but maybe having it in the agenda item summary would be helpful as well, without somehow managing that so it's not going back to those 15 pages, Kalina, that you mentioned earlier. So I think there's a happy medium or a compromise there. If there's nothing further, are there any additional, sorry, let me back up. Are there any additional questions about the mobility management strategy for Andrew or others, Michelle?
I don't have any other questions, just a comment. Again, thank you to Kalina for the insight as to, adapting to a different board or a different set of committee members, whatever that case may be. I think this is maybe where we just want to, I think this is a good opportunity, and I'm glad we're kind of having this conversation, because I think it helps us all just kind of reset and identify a better process that will help us manage, getting these through at the board level. So thank you for that.
Yeah, thanks, Michelle. And it's always nice to have a different composition on the contract committee, having served on it previously. Just everyone's mind works a little bit differently. And so if we can answer questions in this format before it goes to the board, it does, just have that due diligence component that feels a little bit more comfortable for the board to feel like they have that transparency and the opportunity to ask questions. So I'm going to circle back on this particular contract, if that's okay with everyone else, unless there's further comments about the process. Okay. Andrew, I'm just feeling really budget conscious Do you feel like we need this consultant? I know it's stiff money, and so we always feel like it's, you know, it's fine because it's federal dollars, but I pay federal tax dollars every year too. And so I'm really just budget conscious, I guess is the word. Do you feel like the LTD needs this consultant? Or do you feel like we have, you know, people that can manage this without going out for a consultant? I know it's bad timing to ask this since we've already done the RFP work, but just reconsidering in light of, you know, recent events.
Yeah, fair question. So actually, the stiff money that we applied for, right, that's the local payroll tax that's sent up to the state and then back to us. So it is kind of our money. It's not the federal money, and it's got to be spent here in district on something, but it could certainly be spent on something else. And I think your question is a good one. Like, could we do this in-house? So part of the work will be done in-house. Tom and I actually had a lot of conversations. The full stiff award was for $325,000. So we do want to use some of the money to have our staff work on it and reimburse ourselves for some of that grant. The advantage to using a consultant, and I think in particular, part of the proposal that Tool brought is that we really want to leverage their outside experience. Stephen touched on, it'd be nice to know about their work in this field. They've done a lot of this work. They have a lot of connections to other agencies and things that might be more efficient for them to do. So I feel that the proposal actually, in addition to providing more staff capacity, which, you know, I would let AJ talk about our overall staffing levels, but at least in the planning department, my workload and the workloads that I believe my colleagues have, I don't think that we could accomplish all of this work in a reasonable time frame without consultant support. Without reprioritizing other projects that we're already doing. So it's partially staff capacity, but I'm really excited by the approach that they bring and kind of the creativity and experience that they have. It's definitely something that we don't have. And working collaboratively with them, I think we'll be able to come up with a better strategy, because we were clear, we're not Portland, we're not New York, all of these kind of modes, right? We want to talk about them in the context of LTD and who we are. And staff definitely can help guide the consultants on that, but they're going to have a lot of ideas on what's worked for others and what's working elsewhere that we maybe haven't encountered yet.
Sounds good. Thanks, Andrew. Appreciate that feedback. I always just like to push back just to make sure that we're doing the right thing for our constituents and for, in this case, the payroll tax folks. Okay, well, if there's nothing further, I will entertain a motion or not at the committee's disposal. Preference.
Stephen's staying silent, so I'll go for it. I move to forward contract number 2021-05 to the Board of Directors with a recommendation for approval.
Second.
All right, Michelle made the motion, Stephen seconded. Is there any discussion? And then I'll go into a roll call. Okay, Michelle?
Yes.
Stephen?
Yes.
Emily? Yes. All right, motion passes uncontested.
Emily, can I jump in for just a second?
Sure.
I just want to be very clear to Wendy and Colina and Tom, who I see is listening in. I am not at all indicating that you guys are not doing a thorough job. And I totally appreciate your point, Colina, that every board has a different rhythm and a different level of information request. I guess what I'm simply saying is I think there should be some basic checklist that board members are given regarding this sort of process. So it's not a commentary on the thoroughness or the effectiveness of the work that either of you doing or Tom's doing or anyone else is doing. Thank you.
Thanks, Stephen. Appreciate that follow-up comment. So, all right, I think that we're ready to move forward to contract number 2017-02. And it looks like Joe might be our presenter for this particular contract regarding the janitorial services.
That's going to be me, Sunny Melhorn, the service specialist from Facility Management. Hello, everyone. This amendment before you is for an increase of value in the amount for $155,853 for contract 2017-02 with Nympha's Elite Janitorial Services. This contract provides cleaning services for the Glenwood and RideSource operations and maintenance facilities. OSHA requirements for disinfecting of these properties have proven costly due to the extensive hours of staffing of multiple shifts throughout the day and night. Disinfecting requirements for areas staffed for more than 8 hours require a higher frequency of disinfecting than those of normal business hours. The environment we are currently in is dynamic. Changing guidance from the state authorities requires us to stay nimble and remain in compliance and put the health and safety of our employees and passengers first. OSHA has indicated they would shift from a temporary COVID-19 guidelines that started November 2020 to a permanent requirement that starts this month. To ensure we remain in compliance, our intent was to extend the disinfecting scope of work and the associated costs for the remainder of this contract as we were going into our 5th and final year of this contract starting June 1st. This shift in guidance was the primary reason for bringing this amendment to you now. However, just last week, OSHA issued new guidance that actually reduces rather than maintains a high level of cleaning and disinfecting requirements. Thus, the request amended value is something we know we won't exceed. We are in the process of negotiating revised pricing from our contractor reflecting last week's guidance from OSHA. And we will have updated figures for the board's May 19th meeting. This action will give authorization to the general manager to execute an amendment with NMFA's Elite Janitorial Services not to exceed $155,853. This will allow for carrying out all the scope of work to keep LTD in compliance. Thank you for having me today, and let me know if you have any questions.
All right, thank you, Sunny, for that update. I think I have a point of clarification. Do you need us to send this to the board with a motion to approve based on getting some additional information, or do you feel comfortable saying that up to amount? Maybe some clarity, Sunny, on that.
We're comfortable knowing that we're going to have this increase in value. We just going to have some minor adjustments to make for that board meeting. We just found last week that the regulations changed, so we just need to make those adjustments. We'll be doing that early this week and have just the set numbers for you for that. But we know we're not going to exceed that amount that we're asking for.
Okay, so we know it's going to be higher. We just don't know how much higher. I think you used the word dynamic, which feels appropriate given the circumstances. Yeah. Stephen, Michelle, do either of you have questions on this particular contract?
I do. Michelle doesn't. No, Michelle? Okay, Sunny, thank you for your comment. Appreciate that. You've already touched on this, but I just would like to touch on it again for just a moment. The change in the OSHA guidelines was stealing the thunder that I was going to make. This is dynamic, and as it becomes clearer on how COVID-19 spreads and does not spread, I think a lot of the disinfecting is a lot of hygiene theater. And I would just keep a strong eye on charges that are coming through for such services across the board under close scrutiny. Having personally done some of this work for the Census Bureau, I can tell you a lot of it's just a bunch of expensive hooey. So just as long as we're keeping an eyeball on that to make sure that we aren't unnecessarily spending money, which will make Emily very happy, is all I ask. And again, thank you for your time on this, Sonny. I appreciate it.
I think Stephen will be keeping a close eye on.
I was going to make the really dramatic recommendation that we limit it to like 7 hours and 55 minutes, just so we don't fall into that higher level of cleaning obligation. But I will let you all do your jobs and not micromanage that. So thanks, Stephen. Appreciate your comments. Michelle, anything that you'd like to add, or are you all ready to move forward to a motion?
I am good to go.
Okay, well, I'll entertain a motion or not at your all's preference.
I'm going to make this easy on you again, Stephen. I move to forward contract number 2017-02 to the Board of Directors with a recommendation for approval.
Beautifully spoken, and I second, Michelle.
Great. Any discussion before we move to a roll call vote? All right, Michelle.
Yes.
Stephen,
Yes.
Emily, yes. The motion passes uncontested and we'll go to the Board of Directors. All right, that is the end of our agenda, but I'm going to pause for a second and just ask if there's anything further that we need to discuss, any other policy procedures. Otherwise, let's maybe send those ideas in advance via email if possible, just so that we're not giving too many instructions verbally to Colina and team, if that's okay with you all. Okay, I don't have anything further. So AJ, do you want to wrap us up? Maybe.
I do. What I do want to say is that these contracts are typically put on the consent calendar. If the board, during their board report briefings, wants to talk about them, that would be the appropriate time for you to talk about, you know, we reviewed multiple contracts, you see them on the consent. Here's some key highlights. Emily, I'm not sure, as the board chair, would you want, I'm sorry, the committee chair, would you want to do that? You can also ask one of your fellow committee members to take that on. It's really what the committee wants, but that's the appropriate time. If at that point your fellow board members who are not here today have questions, then at the you guys can talk about that. And that's an opportunity when you get to the consent calendar for you to pull them, right? You pull them off the consent and determine that there's some other thing. But the key point being is that this committee is designed so that the entire board at their regular board meeting doesn't have to go into those details. So it really is on this committee to say, if you've got other fellow board members that maybe we can encourage to watch this recording, all public meetings are not now available. It's an opportunity for them to really do their homework on the committee so that your job, of course, is easier when you all come together, 7 of you talking about a bunch of different important topics. So I know it's a lot, but please let me know how myself and my staff can support you in that. But I definitely wanted you to know that this is the appropriate members that could brief the board, and whatever you need from us, we want to make sure we make that available to you.
Yeah, thanks for saying that, AJ. I was just going to mention that the board member reports does come before the consent calendar and the consent agenda. So it's really a good opportunity to weigh in there. And just so that you know, committee members, you'll never step on my toes if there's something that you feel like is valuable to add, or if you feel like we need to pull something from the consent calendar. It'd be helpful that we maybe agree on that in advance, not that it's necessary, but just making it more efficient for everybody. So. Okay, with that being said, it's 4:48. I don't want to keep us any later, so I'm going to go ahead and adjourn this meeting. Thank you, everyone, for your time.